We're near the end of the course, and this week the perspective widens. We've spent 11 weeks examining specific dimensions of virtual worlds and the social life within them. What games mean, how economies work, how design encodes politics, how ethnography navigates a field site made of code and community. This week we step back and ask a question that has been implicit throughout. Where do games sit in the broader history of the relationship between the digital and the physical? And what has that relationship become? The short answer is that something important has changed. And the name for what has changed, the concept that will organise this week's readings, is eversion. To understand eversion, you need to understand what it is the eversion of. The eversion. So in 1984, William Gibson published Neuromancer, and with it coined the word that would define a cultural era, cyberspace. His definition, already quoted in this course, describes it as a consensual hallucination, a vast, navigable, three-dimensional information space that exists alongside and separate from the physical world, accessible by jacking directly into a neural interface. In the novel, the physical body, what Gibson's characters call the meat, is left behind in a dirty apartment while the mind rages free through a luminous grid of data. Gibson was writing science fiction, not prophecy, but his cultural imagination proved extraordinarily generative. Cyberspace became the dominant metaphor through which the internet was understood in its first decades of public life. Surfing the web, going online, virtual communities, logging in. All of this language encodes a spatial metaphor. There is a world over there, separate from the world over here, and you travel to it. The digital is a destination. This had specific political valences that were not accidental. The cyberspace imaginary carried, as we saw in week 5, through Malaby's account of Linden Lab, a deeply libertarian set of assumptions. Online, you could reinvent yourself. You could shed the social markers of the physical body, your race, your gender, your age, and exist as pure mind. The celebrated early Wired magazine slogan was, "All that we can imagine, all that we can dream." The internet on this view was a space of potential liberation from the constraints of the material world. Huizinga's Magic Circle, which we critiqued in week 2, is a local expression of this broader cultural imaginary. The game is a cyberspace in miniature, a bounded, separate world with its own rules and its own stakes, set apart from the rest of life. What Consalvo was doing when she argued there is no magic circle was not just a claim about cheating in EverQuest. It was a claim about an entire cultural framework, the framework that assumed a clean separation between the digital world and the world. Stephen Jones's argument is that this cultural framework has now ended. Not that it was always wrong, though as Consalvo showed, it was always more porous than the metaphor suggested, but that the historical conditions that sustained it have passed. What replaced it is eversion. The word comes from anatomy, to evert something, a tube, a membrane, a sock, is to turn it inside out. The inner surface becomes the outer surface. What was enclosed is now exposed. What was hidden is now the world you inhabit. Jones uses the image of a mesh bag. If you push outwards from inside, the bag turns inside out. What was interior becomes exterior. Eversion describes the process by which the digital is turned inside out into the physical world. Rather than us entering cyberspace, cyberspace has exited into us, into the material surfaces, the built environments, the everyday objects and practices that constitute ordinary life. He traces us through a series of convergences. The emergence of smartphones as universal computing devices that go everywhere the body goes. The proliferation of QR codes and RFID tags that embed digital information in physical objects. Augmented reality applications that overlay digital data onto physical space. Location-based games, beginning with early projects like geocaching, extending through Ingress and Pokemon Go, that make the physical landscape into a playing field for digital activity. The smart city, where environmental sensors, surveillance infrastructure, and data networks are woven into the physical fabric of urban space. In all of these, the digital does not provide an alternative to physical reality. It inhabits it, annotates it, and restructures it. The cultural shift Joan identifies is acute. In the cyberspace era, the premium metaphors were depth and immersion. You went into a digital world. You were immersed in it. The Eversion metaphor is the opposite, surface and texture. The digital does not go deep. It spreads across the surface of the physical world, becoming part of its texture. And this changes everything about how digital experience works. You're not jacking in and leaving the meat behind. You are walking down the street where every surface can potentially carry digital information. Every object can potentially be a node in a network. Every location can potentially have a layer of meaning that only your device can read. The implications for games specifically are significant. If games were the paradigmatic cyberspaces, the clearest expression of the cultural imaginary of a bounded world set apart from the rest of life, then Eversion hits games first and hardest. Pokemon Go is not a game that you enter, it is a game that has entered the world, that has turned the streets of your city into a playing field, that has superimposed game logic, resource collection, territorial competition, encounters with opponents, onto the space you walk through to get to work. The magic circle is not just leaking, it has turned inside out. This is not simply a technological development, it's a cultural one. Jones's argument is that the dominant mode of cultural engagement with the digital has shifted from immersion to integration. We no longer expect the digital to be elsewhere. We expect it to be here, now, woven into the fabric of our ordinary world. And this expectation, this normalization, is itself the Eversion. Thomas Malaby's contribution to this week's argument approaches the same transition from inside the practice of game design. His concept of hypomediacy describes a specific aspiration that has come to dominate game design aesthetics. The drive to make virtual environments feel not just realistic, but naturally real, as though their conventions were not conventions, but facts of the world. Bolter and Grusin's influential account of digital media distinguished two competing aesthetics. Immediacy, which tries to make the medium itself disappear, the goal of transparent realism, or the aspiration of seeing through the screen as if through a window onto a real scene. And hypermediacy, which celebrates the visibility of the medium, multiplying windows, interfaces, and frames. Malaby's hypomediacy is a variation on immediacy but with a specific valence. It's not just about making the medium transparent, but about making the virtual environment feel like it has always been there, always been real, always been natural. The naturalness is the point. Not photorealism exactly, but the aspiration that what you encounter in the game world should feel given, not designed, nor contingent. Think about what this aspiration actually demands. A game world that feels naturally real cannot feel like it was made. Its weather systems have to feel like weather, not like a weather engine. Its social hierarchies have to feel like the way things are, not like design choices about respawn rates and loot tables. Its in-game economy has to feel like a market, not like a system someone programmed. The really real is not realism as visual fidelity. It's the aspiration to make the contingent feel necessary, the design feel found. What Malaby's paper adds to Jones' account of eversion is an analysis of the mechanism by which eversion is accomplished from inside design. Eversion is not just something that happens at a cultural scale. It is something that game designers actively pursue through the aesthetics of hypomediacy. Every time a designer makes a game world feel more natural, more given, more like the world you live in rather than a world someone constructed, they're participating in the cultural project of dissolving the boundary between digital and physical. The magic circle from the design side is something that games are increasingly built to undermine. There is an ideological dimension here that's worth naming explicitly. The digitally natural is not a neutral aesthetic. When a virtual world feels like it has always been there, when its property relations, hierarchies, economic structures feel like facts of nature rather than design choices, those design choices become politically invisible in exactly the way Winner and Bucher described in week 3. The politics have been made to feel natural. The architecture of the world has been naturalized, and the assumed player, the person for whom this world was designed to feel naturally habitable, inherits all of the political assumptions that went into its construction without having to see them as political assumptions at all. Ian Bogost approaches the same cultural moment from a different angle. How to do things with video games, from which this week's final chapter is drawn, is his account of the cultural work games have come to do. Rhetoric, education, fitness, illness, transit, music, art, therapy, pranks, promotion, even reverence. Each chapter of the book examines a specific function that the game form has been put to. Anything but games is the conclusion, and it's where the argument arrives. The argument is not that games have failed, or that the game form is being debased by commercial exploitation. It is that the game form has succeeded beyond any definition of what a game was supposed to be. Games have proliferated into every domain of culture precisely because the things that make them games, the structured challenge, the feedback loop of action and consequence, the particular quality of engagement that Csikszentmihalyi and Bennett called flow, turn out to be culturally generative in ways that have nothing to do with entertainment or leisure. Bogost coined the term gamification, and then famously expressed profound ambivalence about what it described. The gamification of everything, the application of point systems, leaderboards, progress bars, and achievement notifications to exercise, such as in Fitbit, to work, in examples like Salesforce badges or productivity dashboards, or even education like in Duolingo, to civic participation in the form of city apps rewarding residents for recycling and reporting potholes. The logic of games has everted into the most mundane domains of ordinary life, and the critical question, which Bogost raises in Anything But Games, with more nuance than the popular term gamification allows, is what happens to both games and to those domains when the merger occurs. On the one side, the game form, applied to domains beyond entertainment, can genuinely do things that other forms cannot. The structured challenge creates engagement. The feedback loop creates learning. The community creates motivation. Bogost is not dismissing the cultural productivity of the game form when it is applied outside entertainment. Some of those applications are genuinely valuable. On the other side, the proliferation of game mechanics into non-game domains has not made those domains more playful. It has made them more legible to management, more amenable to quantification, more susceptible to the kind of monitoring and optimization that strips out whatever genuine play was there in the first place. The exercise app that turns running into a points game does not liberate you from the management of your body. It intensifies it, adds a layer of self-surveillance and extracts data in the process. The productivity dashboard that gamifies your work output does not make work more playful. It makes play more like work. Bogost's unease about gamification is precisely Malaby's fear about ludocapitalism, now visible in its full cultural breadth. The game form, deployed everywhere, does not spread play. It spreads the extraction of flow. So let me close by bringing the three threads of this course to their final form. The boundary question, where does the game end and real life begin, has been pressed from week 2, when Consalvo showed the magic circle is always porous, through week 7, when Burke showed virtual economies are real economies, through week 8, when Fickle showed the play-work distinction is enforced by racial capitalism. This week, the question reaches its highest order answer. The boundary was always a product of historical cultural imaginary, the cyberspace imaginary, that was itself limited, fragile, and ideologically loaded. Eversion is the name for that imaginary's end. We are not just saying the circle leaks, we're saying that the concept of a circle, a bounded digital space set apart from the rest of life, no longer names the dominant mode of how the digital and the physical relate. The digital is not elsewhere, it is here. The assumed player question, who does the design imagine, began with Winner's imagined user of Moses' bridges, moved through the gendered assumptions of the gaming industry, through the magic circle of whiteness, through the racialized labour of the gold farm. After cyberspace, the assumed player has expanded to encompass everyone who has been enrolled into a gamified world. The employee whose productivity is measured by a leaderboard, the jogger whose running is tracked and ranked, the citizen whose civic participation is rewarded with points. Everyone has become an assumed player, but the logic of design continues to serve particular interests. Gamification in the service of engagement has become more often than not gamification in the service of data extraction and behavioural management. The assumed player in this world is always the assumed worker, someone whose engagement is a product being monetized. And the play-work question, seeded in week 1 with She's-Mentahali and Bennett, described games as engineered technologies for producing flow, arrives here at its civilizational expression. Ludocapitalism is not a niche phenomenon in Chinese gold farms or top-coder programming contests. It is the general cultural logic of a world after cyberspace, in which the game form has everted into every domain of life, and in which the capacity to produce flow, absorption, engagement, the willingness to keep going, is the commodity that institutions across every sector are now in the business of extracting. What distinguishes play from ludocapitalist extraction? Malaby's answer from week 2 remains the best one available: genuine indeterminacy. Play, in Malaby's sense, is a disposition toward a world that admits no transcendently ordered account, a readiness to improvise in the face of outcomes nobody controls in advance. The gold farm, the gamified workplace, the fitness tracker that has turned your body into a personal best, these do not produce genuine indeterminacy. They produce the appearance of indeterminacy. You might win, you might beat your score, you might reach the leaderboard, while structuring the environment so that what is actually extracted is precisely determined and directed. This is why Jesse Owens at Berlin, the moment Malaby called the game biting back, remains the paradigm case. Real play, genuine indeterminacy, can still escape the institutional design that tries to manage its outcomes. But it requires us to see the design for what it is first.